Okay, we're going to go ahead and get ready now. Let's get ready and let's start. Start your engines and let's go. So, welcome everyone for the second day of Idea Week. Very excited to have you all. I'm James Thompson, I'm the Associate Vice President for Innovation at the University of Notre Dame. And we have a really fun panel. I think you're really going to, really fun speaker that I think is really going to talk about something that's really fascinating. I had the chance to review Energy Vault's website, and I'm not going to get into it because Richard's going to introduce him, but really fascinating stuff. So I would like to introduce the moderator of our panel, Richard McManus. Richard is a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame studying electrical engineering. He's heavily involved at the Idea Center, both as a startup coach working to help student entrepreneurs turn their ideas into viable companies, and as an entrepreneur himself. Richard's student venture, Mound Power, is competing in the McCloskey competition later this afternoon and works to provide coaches and athletes with the training tools they need to stay healthy and at the top of their game. Sounds very interesting. Well, good luck in McCloskey, and I'll turn it over to Richard.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening, or this morning. I would like to introduce Mr. Robert Piconi. Extremely honored to have him here today. He's a 92 grad from Notre Dame, an experienced leader with multiple Fortune 100 companies, and most recently, the co-founder and CEO of Energy Vault, a company focused on enabling a renewable world by addressing the problem of how to store renewable energy in both an economical and sustainable way. So everyone, please welcome Mr. Robert Piconi. So I'd like to start out today by asking you a little bit about your Notre Dame story and how you got here. So you're originally from Southern California. What made you come here to Indiana, to the Midwest, to get your education?
It wasn't the weather, especially from California. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining. The campus is just so different from when I was here long ago. But look, growing up in Southern California, I could have stayed there, and a lot of people do in California. I was a California native. But I went to a small Catholic high school, and I didn't want to go to a big school. And I also really prioritized spirituality and faith as a part of my decision. So that was an important one. And Notre Dame just sort of fit. I also wanted to get out of California and experience, another part of the United States, which is sort of a theme for my career, my life, of getting and exploring things globally. So that was what was behind it, and it's just a great choice. I ended up meeting a woman who became my wife in Italy. I went on the Rome program my sophomore year. Well, first of all, my freshman year we won the national championship, which there's not many people that can say that. It's 30 years ago. So that was amazing. I didn't see us lose the first year. I didn't see us lose the second year because I went to Rome for a year. And then I saw us lose to Stanford when we got back my junior year. I was on the Rome program, and I ended up, dating the woman I met there and through university, and we got married. We have 8 children now. I've been married 28 years, and so it was just a great experience here, and it's great to be back.
Great, that's exciting to hear. Next up, I wanted to ask what your most valuable experience during your time here in South Bend was. Now, this might be a tricky one between winning the championship and meeting your future wife, but out of all the classes, the learning, the football, like we mentioned, if you had to pick one moment, what do you still carry with you today?
Yeah, it's really, for me, there really wouldn't be a moment. I mean, obviously, significant life event when you meet the woman that's going to be your wife, and we have 8 amazing children. 2 of them are here, by the way. My 2 younger boys that are 13 and 16 are here with me. I was earlier this week at Iowa State. My sister is a director of innovation and entrepreneurship, so she's leading and led the development of their innovation program. So my 2 youngest stayed and accompanied me there, and they're here this week. But it's more, I guess, I think about Notre Dame as the relationships I built here would be most significant, starting with my wife, and then the relationships that I built that I still cultivate, and really the relationship with the university, which is, I was really remiss, I think, for the last 20 years of not being able to be as engaged here and to support the mission of Notre Dame. And now that I'm back in the U.S. more, we were 10 years in Switzerland, so until just 3 years ago. So getting back engaged, and when you're starting a company, and it seemed I was always between the 8 kids and working for large companies and running global businesses, I never, it was difficult to find the time outside of that and prioritize the time to re-engage here with Notre Dame and its mission. And I think the last few years in particular, it's been on my mind, and Mike Connaughton reached out, who's a part of the development group in the university here, and I really felt the calling to come and get back and engage. So I'd say, just to close on your question, those relationships, that network, Notre Dame's mission, sort of has rekindled itself with me as I've looked at addressing sustainability the last few years and helping the planet, and I want to really incorporate Notre Dame as a part of that now, and which is why I'm here. So.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think we've all experienced the Notre Dame family here. It's very strong. And so we'd like to welcome you back with open arms, and are excited to have you here. Before we continue, I want to mention briefly that we will be taking questions from the public towards the latter half of this interview. So you can go to slido.com and enter that code to submit your questions. So moving on, after Notre Dame, you graduated and then you entered the industry of diversified energy with the Amoco Corporation. With that said, was renewable energy a priority to you as an undergrad, or something that you discovered later from industry experience?
It was not a priority for me. It wasn't really on my radar. And even, I would say, working for a large oil company at that time, which is Amoco, it's now British Petroleum. So I was actually part of that merger in '98. It was a $70 billion merger, the largest industrial merger to date at that time. I don't think it was on the oil company's agenda, honestly. It should have been. But unfortunately, economics drive decisions most of the time, and as we're experiencing now, I think, with what's happening with in the energy market. So it wasn't on my radar then. I love the energy space. It's fascinating. It's the largest GDP space in the world, 8.6 trillion. So there's a lot to do, and it's going to be so critical to the transition. It's fascinating, like a lot of the big areas of focus, whether it's how do we feed the world? How do we, healthcare? How do we take care of people, improve quality of life, and how do we power the world? It's amazing in the world that you have some that have everything and others that don't. So, and I think with renewables, what's been interesting now as I reflect on being a part of a big diversified oil company at that time, and since I made the migration, I met Bill Gross from Idea Lab, that I'll talk about, I'm sure, more today, and he opened my eyes to what was going on with climate change. And over the years, I met him in 2008, and that's what really got me started in renewables. But it was not on my radar, or I would say any of the oil companies, for sure, back in the 90s. I don't think that was a priority for them. Yeah.
Right. So my next question then is, if you could go back to the time when you did start at Amoco, and tell yourself that there would soon be these emerging technologies that could compete with those Goliath fossil fuel companies, you think you would believe yourself?
Oh, well, we have to coexist. I mean, we're gonna need a lot of the fossil fuel to support, the energy demand and growth that's out in the world, and a lot of the emerging markets. It's a little scary because China, for example, which for the first time has actually put a stake in the ground and a commitment on GHGs, they have their 30-60 plan, which involves them peaking with GHG emissions in 2030. So they're going to be continuing to increase emissions through 2030. And then they get to net carbon neutral in 2060. So that's their plan. It's great that they're making a commitment now. So for the first time, as a lot of countries and companies are. So that's very encouraging. But it is something that I think, relative to how renewables are going to work and how that's going to work with the fossil fuel evolution, we're going to need both. There's going to be a rapid more deployment of renewables. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of storage solutions, a lot of good ones out there. We're one of them, lithium ions, another one. Lithium's not a good technology for utility scale energy storage. Energy storage is really tough. We can now generate electrons super cheap. Wind and solar are 1 to 2 cents a kilowatt hour. To put that in perspective, the cheapest fossil fuel, combined cycle natural gas, is about 5 cents. So renewables have won, but the problem is, unless you can store them economically, the economic equation is very difficult to solve. It costs a multiple to store electrons than it does to create them. So storage is up in the 15 to 20 cents, for example, kilowatt hour. So that equation is really difficult to solve. And, unfortunately, we haven't innovated enough, and I'll include myself in that, in terms of the innovation required to really solve that energy storage problem. And there's a lot of exciting developments, but not a lot at scale that can be deployed today. And that's why I'm really excited about what we're doing and to help. And I really am excited about any of the companies that can get to market and innovate here. So
Certainly. So continuing from there, right around the time Emeco merged with BP, you decided to go back to school for your MBA and then had the opportunity to work in several different industries after that. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey throughout these different industries and your motivation to work in so many different spaces?
Yeah. Well, the late 90s, I always loved technology. And I think for those of you that were around in the late 90s, there was this thing called the internet that was evolving. And I remember I was so excited to go from 14.4 to 28.8 in my modem. It's just exciting for me. And then 28 to 56.6. And I can, that was an exciting evolution. I was working in Europe at the time. We were building a large chemical plant in Belgium, and we were working with an engineering company in Italy, which is cool to go back there as an expatriate. Of course, I had no money as a student, so it was great to go back there and we had one child at the time. But so I think I really was excited about technology. I found myself in the evenings following what these companies were doing. Of course, the stock market was valuing these things high, so it was fascinating. So I did a 1-year program at Northwestern for the MBA program, and then I shifted and went to Bell Labs. And of course, the bubble burst, and that was a very interesting experience to go through something very transformational and deal with that at a large corporation. This was a second Fortune 100 company I was in, and to deal with super high growth and then to have everything come crashing down and have to deal with those things operationally and from an engineering and how we engineered our product, what we chose to outsource. And so that was, I think, one of the experiences was going into telecom and technology. So that was an important theme for me because I really learned a lot about software and the importance of the role software could play in networking, which is a very interesting corollary, I think, to electrons and grids. So it's fascinating to me, and this is again another theme. As I think about different domains I've worked in spaces, the integration of these technologies is also an innovation in and of itself, and how you can use different domains, and that's what we've done with Energy Vault that we'll get to. But so I worked in the telecom and did a lot of work in software and networking and loved that space. And then I got into running companies. There was another transatlantic merger, Alcatel-Lucent, so I went through my second one, and then was recruited to run a public company called Spirent Communications, which did telecom test and measurement, and then was recruited in private equity. I really enjoyed running businesses. I've sort of scaled my career through engineering and product management into running businesses and loved it, and building teams, and then did some work in running companies in private equity, and that got me into a third industry, into healthcare and diagnostic imaging, and created some new businesses. Then that got me to Europe, and that's where after we sold successfully one of the healthcare companies for Berkshire, I bought the European business and sort of rolled my equity into that, and that was my first sort of starting from zero company and building it, making payroll and going against GE, Philips, and Siemens as a startup company in Europe, and we were successful doing it. we won't have time to get into that. That experience itself was really unique for me and a big learning experience. But anyway, so I got into some other things that I just loved building and running businesses and innovating and taking on the big competitive companies, and that really got me motivated and excited, and so that was a theme that then led me to get to building Energy Vault, essentially getting back into renewables and meeting Bill Gross, and yeah.
Right. So like you said, after going through all those different industries, that eventually led you to Energy Vault, which was an idea that was generated in Idea Lab, a technology incubator run by Bill Gross. Idea Lab was founded in 1996, and out of the 150 companies it has created, more than 45 went on to being publicly traded. Could you speak to how you got involved with the Idea Lab and how that led to the co-founding of Energy Vault?
Sure. Just one correction. 45 of those companies either went to IPO or got acquired by a strategic, which for all of you here, that's a tremendous track record. I mean, to have 30-year companies that are successful, that's not the normal rate for startups. So I met Bill Gross in 2008 when he recruited me to be the CEO of one of his solar companies. It was a solar-based fuel company, and that timing didn't work out because I was on my way to Switzerland, and when you plan with 8 children, it's tough to sort of turn that aircraft carrier around in the canal. So we were already on our way there, and so that didn't work out. But we stayed in touch. We really connected on a set of levels, and so we collaborated over the times that I was in Europe and running other businesses on ideas. After I sold the healthcare company, I did some angel investing over in Europe, and Bill called me one day. He didn't know I was in Switzerland. He thought I was in the UK, and he said, I have the penultimate idea for energy storage, and I want you to be the CEO. And the timing just worked out. And a lot of your career and things comes down to timing in the end. And I happened to be at a board role, so I wasn't occupied. And of course, I couldn't say no to Bill. I didn't even know what the idea was, but I flew out to Southern California and dug into it for a few months with the CTO, who happened, this was a total coincidence, the CTO he was working with, who he's collaborating with, happened to be in Switzerland too, just 30 kilometers north of Lugano, which is where I was. And so I just felt like this was a sign that this was going to be the thing that got me back into what I was collaborating with him on for 10 years in renewable and how to solve this problem and be a part of the solution for climate change. So that's how we got started. And when I joined, the idea was a little different. The concept was, think about a parking structure and PVC trays of water that would traverse down, so still using gravity, and through that process, turning a motor generator and generating the electricity. So gravity, for those of you that don't know, or in energy storage, these large pumped hydroelectric dams are 90% of all energy storage today. So 90% of the electrons stored come from these massive dams that have been around for 75 to 100 years. So we took that concept, of course, and developed a way to actually build it separately, so you don't have to disrupt rivers and wildlife ecosystems, and scaling it and solve some economic things for it. But we made the concept. We decided that we would create the company. So in late 2017, and started January 2018, not so long ago, and started with this first concept that was the rotating crane with the 6 arms. Looks sort of like a transformer, a giant transformer. My kids were fascinated with it. And we interconnected it to the grid, this first commercial scale system in July 2020 through a very tough COVID period. COVID in Europe hit Milan because of the flights from China. So that was sort of the epicenter. And Lugano is it's an hour from Milan, just across the border into Switzerland. So it was it was a difficult time to get all that done. But so that's how we got started.
Great. So you kind of mentioned this before with starting a company after having that experience with Fortune 100 companies. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how your leadership experience from those large companies applies to sitting down with a new concept, a new idea, and really building something from scratch.
Yeah. By the way, it's fascinating because I talk to student groups about entrepreneurship and innovation, and there's a natural assumption that somehow you just start with this, you're born with it, and right out of college you just go and you're an entrepreneur, and that's not the path I took. And I don't think it's necessarily the most logical path. I mean, there's a lot of learning you do in life and in running companies and building teams, and a lot of mistakes you make along the way that sort of inform you and how you improve and develop as a leader. So I think that time is important, and I think there's a lot of people associate, Steve Jobs or the Mark Zuckerbergs, the people that are the dropouts from university and go on to great things, and people want to mirror that. But I took a little different path. I'll tell you that I grew up in a family business, and when you do a family business, for those of you that have been in them, you have to sort of do everything, and so it's sort of, you're the general manager of a lot of things. And I worked with the public in that family business, so I really liked engaging with people, and felt like I'd have a strong capability to build things and lead teams, and I like that aspect as well. So while I worked for larger companies, my purpose then, I mean, back in the early 90s, it was sort of cool to be global. I mean, that was the thing, people wanted to be global and internationalized, because there wasn't the internet that had, now the world is so small, right? Because we're so connected. I really wanted to go develop and get a lot of experience globally, and experience other cultures, other places of the world, how that informs how you do business and how you build and grow teams, people's companies. And so I started with a large company, for the large oil company, because that was going to give me an ability to grow the career and potentially have global employment and work potentially overseas. And that's what I did. So that was very helpful. And so I continued on that in things that interested me. So technology interested me. So after graduate school, I went to Bell Labs and focused on networking, and I ran global businesses there as well. So all these experiences really helped shape what I was able to do as I moved into private equity and building and running companies on my own, and was still growing and developing as I am now. And I think a lot of that experience you get and learn from large organizations and processes. The fact that I worked in large public companies has been extremely helpful as a founder of a startup, and sort of shepherding a company through phases of seed funding, Series A, Series B, Series C, COVID, pipe markets and SPAC markets and volatility, and getting, it seemed like, I've never stopped fundraising through that whole process. And we had all that experience in the public sector was really important, because a lot of startups have CEOs that have never worked in a public company. And that's a little bit of a problem, right? Because running a public company is not for the faint of heart, and you have a whole different threshold of responsibility and around compliance and FCPA and these nice acronyms that are very meaningful when you're running a public company. And it's just been I feel like all the learnings and all the mistakes I made in the past, and you learn from, you build, and I've really put all that learning into this company, and we were the best performing IPO this year, and through a very difficult geopolitical climate, and a lot of our peers are down 40 to 70% this year, our publicly traded peers, and we're up 50%. So it's just been, I feel very humbled by the experience, and ringing the bell on the New York Stock Exchange on Valentine's Day, which was sort of cool, and opening the market. And it's just if any of you get the chance to do that, it's just an amazing thing. And I'm still, that day and that whole week, and I had a lot of my family around, most of my family were there, and it was just phenomenal. So anyway, my point is, those experiences in the larger companies helped at that time, and what I went through and where the world was over the last 30 years of my career, through globalization and through a lot of the things that happened, and there were some significant downturns in 2000 and 2008 with the financial crisis, and we've had the pandemic here. So all those things have helped sort of shape my experience set that have allowed me to, I think, be very supportive and helpful to Energy Vault.
Right.
Yeah, so I wanna get back to the success that Energy Vault has found, but quickly I wanna visit the team building process that you mentioned. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in tech, can face the issue of deciding how they want to go about building their team, whether they want something small that can iterate quickly or something more diverse to balance each other out.
Yeah.
So how did you tackle that problem at Energy Vault?
Well, I really believe this is one of the fundamental reasons for our success and how we built the team. I think as we got started, less was more for us, because in the sense of we had some very talented people that came together, and we moved very quickly because we didn't hire up a lot of people and really focused on maintaining a small core team. And we had 10 people for the first 2 years, 10 to 15 to 20. We leveraged partners. So it's the other thing, to move quickly, you can't do it all yourself. And so we innovated with groups. In our case, for example, we did a lot of material science work with Cemex. We didn't want to use concrete because it's bad for the environment. Also, it was too expensive. So we innovated, and they developed a polymer to make roads in low-cost countries where they couldn't use expensive aggregates, so they could just use the soil to make a composite strong enough for cars and trucks to drive on. And we took that application, and again, this is part of this innovation of looking at applications of something else and applying it to what you're doing. So to make these 35 metric ton blocks, we could use the soil from the excavation, and it's all local, so that minimizes transport, and the transportation sector is the biggest contributor to GHGs, to greenhouse gas emissions. So that was important to us. So I think in building the team also means some of the I think external folks you have to leverage to get there quickly. We work with Caltech and a lot of the seismic and civil engineering that was a complement to the team. I think the second piece is culture and ensuring that we had the right people that had the right mindset and that believed in what we believed in. We didn't want anybody that was there for a paycheck. People had to believe in our purpose, and it had to be sincere, and we vetted for those things. This aspect of working together as a team on a united mission and a lot of core values for us around humility as a team. It's important because you don't want to drink your own Kool-Aid, and as an organization, that's really fundamental for us and how we work together without hierarchy and the things that plague, I think, some larger companies. So this we really tested for early, and in the end, you can buy and sell the best technical talent or the best quant or the best modeler or the best AI expertise, because it's just a matter of money. What you can't buy and sell are people that have the passion and purpose and skill sets and willingness to learn and to work as a team and put our mission, which for us is about decarbonization, at the forefront of how they interact and build and grow their own career. We have a tremendously diverse team, not because diversity is a strategy. Our strategy around people is hire the best people. And I've always built teams like that. And because of that, we naturally get a diverse team because the best teams are diverse. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm one of 2 American flags on our leadership team. There's like 10 of us if you go to our website. So we have an extremely diverse team globally. We have I think we have more women than men in our organization, which is fairly unique. It's just I think that aspect of thinking about what good looks like and how do the best performing teams perform, and these perspectives you get from people from other parts of the world. I had a question at Iowa State from a student that said, hey, how do you think about US innovation? There's Silicon Valley and, and then you've got China and manufacturing, et cetera. And I really, I think we need to think differently about where innovation exists and how it gets developed and the roles that countries play. I mean, for example, in other parts of the world, they don't have the resources we do in the US, and they have to be very creative about how they meet their minimum living needs, for example. And there's a lot of innovation in these places in other parts of the world, and that's part of the diversity aspect also that we've built into our team from people all over, from a lot of different places. So I'd say it's fundamental. It's the most important thing. The most important thing in building. I mean, I've seen really good ideas not go anywhere because they have the wrong people involved, or they didn't have the right approach. And I've seen things that were sort of mediocre, but had amazing people around it, and they turned them into great things. So it's really fundamental. And for us at Energy Vault, that if anybody else was here from Energy Vault and you ask them, why they joined, it wasn't for the paycheck, or they would talk about culture and purpose. And for us, that's fundamental.
Great. Yeah, that's a great strategy for building the team. Next up, I want to ask, so Energy Vault, for those of you that don't know, is addressing the intermittency of renewable energy generation and the high cost for the necessary storage of that energy. Like you mentioned before, it's cheap to make electrons. The issue is that you can't always make them. It's not always sunny. It's not always windy. So you started with a pilot system in 2018, manufactured a commercial demonstration unit in July of 2022, or July of 2020, like you mentioned, and have now developed the Energy Vault Resiliency Center, which is a modular solution that can scale to various energy requirements. Can you tell us a little bit about what that undertaking was to have such a large, massive proof of concept, kind of like right out of the get-go?
Yeah. Well, look, energy is massive, as I mentioned, as a GDP, but also if you're going to be in energy storage and to be considered grid scale, it's just, you can't, I mean, you can start small, it's fine, but if you really want to build and move and attract customers and investors, you need to prove your technology out at a large scale. So in our Series B, when we launched the company toward the end of 2018, when we announced the company, we had a tremendous interest from all over the world, and our sales funnel, people just came in, signed NDAs, and shared with us what they would like to do. It was like $4 to $5 billion of potential opportunity over 5 years. When I saw that, our strategy on our Series B was to raise more money. So we raised 110 million, which for energy storage was one of the largest commitments ever made. That was done by SoftBank. What people didn't know then is, that was done in some tranches. So that was in 2019. And so we chose to go right to a first commercial scale of our first prototype, which is a 6-arm operating crane. And that's the one that's built in Switzerland right now. And it's the one that we interconnected to the grid July 2020. So getting to scale was important for us. But there was another aspect that was fundamental that is so important I think for companies and startups as you're growing. As we built that first prototype, we were still listening to customers who told us that on the one side, they loved, first of all, they understood gravity, they understood pumped hydro, they loved it because it was predictable, it was proven. They loved our approach on sustainability of doing everything local jobs, avoiding the GHGs from the transport sector. They loved our costs. They liked the fact that we didn't degrade over time. Remember, the only technology that they had to deploy was lithium ion, which is great for your cars and great for your electronics, and I guess fine for shorter duration, but it is not a good technology for longer duration or scale. So they liked a lot, but they did tell us two things that they said, look, not everybody wants to look at this operating crane thing, and it's for permitting, it could create some challenges. Now, granted, we focused on long duration at the time, longer duration, because we felt like that was going to become important, and it is becoming important now, but most of the market right now is 2 to 4 hour storage. So the first thing the customers told us was we'd like an alternative to lithium ion in at least the higher end of shorter duration, so 2 to 4 hour. And so that was important. So that meant we had to decouple energy and power, meaning we needed to give our customers the ability to define, I need 50 megawatts over 4 hours, so that's 200 megawatt hours of storage capacity, or they could say, I want 150 megawatts over 10 hours, so that's 1.5 gigawatt hours of storage capacity. So we needed to allow them to be able to customize what they wanted from us, so we developed a more modular system. And then the second thing they said was, you have to do something that's shorter in height and that maybe just looks a little more like a building, and that's what we did. So we lowered the height by 40% and developed basically something that's just a building, a foundation fixed frame, and these sets of like vertical freight elevators that move these composite blocks. So we took the same core composite blocks, the same software, the AI machine vision software, and the same process of the lifting and lowering, taking excess wind and solar to power the lifting of these composite blocks. And then at height, of course, it's all potential energy, just like in a pumped hydroelectric dam, that water that's sitting there is all potential energy. And then when you lower those, in our cases, the composite blocks, it all dynamically. So with the software fully automated, it lowers and turns the motors and the generators that put the energy back out to the grid. So this process along the way, listening to customers and being willing to adapt. And we did that, in 4 years, we basically did a full iteration of the product to adapt it to what the market would need. And that increased our addressable market. And it helped us meet the earlier stage right now of the shorter duration market that we would have been only focused on longer duration had we stuck with our first product. So we did that iteration in this time period, and that's actually the product now. The new one is the one that we're going to market with.
That's all very impressive. It leads very well into my next question is, how did you do this? How did you achieve all these things? Having 8 children, how is that possible? With the nature of entrepreneurship, we often find it difficult to leave the job at the office. So how were you able to balance the responsibilities between work and home, having such a large family?
Well, the company was the easy part. The 8 children, that's, we can talk about that. No, I'm not a believer in you have to separate work and family in the following sense. You have a purpose in life, and there's a connection between what you're doing and what I spend my time doing that is a part of providing for the family. So there's a strong connection there. And hopefully what I do that I'm passionate about has a lot to do with the values and things that I'm teaching to my children. So it's all interrelated, and everything I'm doing with Energy Vault has a purpose for the world. It has a purpose, obviously for me personally, in serving what I'd like to do, what I'm passionate about. It has a very strong purpose for my family, not only in providing, but I want my children to understand that what I do has a purpose and it's important in life, and we're solving problems in a way that go beyond just dollars and cents. We're thinking not only about, for example, solving a problem in renewable energy storage, but how we create that solution, how we thinking about sustainability, our carbon footprint, the types of materials. Could we use alternate materials that otherwise are destined for landfills, like coal ash, like tailings from the mining sector, like these massive wind blades that are fiberglass that suffer fatigue that today are buried or burned very bad. And so how do we think about reusing those materials, recycling, and the whole circular economic aspect? So I mention this only because, to your question of, how do you do these things with a large family? I'm probably more uniquely qualified to do these things because of the nature of, managing children. And what's probably not known to the audience is we were having our second child. I was 27, and we got natural quadruplets. I think it was back then it was 1 in 15.3 million chance for that. And I was living. We were living in Rome, and at the time we were doing the engineering for this project, and we were going to be moving to Belgium when the critical path shifted to construction, which is where we were building. And I'll never forget, actually, it's a Notre Dame story. Of course, it's all related. My wife was in Southern California with my parents because I was at the Notre Dame Navy game in Ireland. And I traveled from Rome up there with the project manager, actually at Amoco, was also a Notre Dame grad. So I was there with a group of us, and it was Sunday morning earlier because we had to go to the airport. And I called, there's 8 hours difference to California. So I called home to check in, and my father answered the phone and just said, "Your wife has something to tell you." I said, "Okay." So she had gone to her, she had at 9 weeks had gone to her appointment, and so I asked how it went, and she said fine. And she said, she told me that there were multiples, and so I thought twins, but I didn't have a chance to say anything because she said, there were 4, and I didn't say anything for a while. I didn't. What do you say to that? I was a little hungover too from the game the night before. But anyway, so that's dealing with those things, and I remember we flew back on Aer Lingus. We were in rows 27, 28. There were like 6 of us to Rome, and I think we drank all the Jameson on that plane. But anyway, so I've had to deal with some things in my life that actually I think I learned that first year that I don't remember a lot of the first year of the quads, to go without sleep, and that's been helpful for running companies and startups. So anyway, it's been I think my main point is that things are really interconnected in how at least I think about the collective ecosystem and our collective spirit, and what I do during the day, what I do at night, and what I do all the time and how that relates to my family.
Great. So one last question before we open it up to the audience. You've obviously learned a lot about entrepreneurship and business, more so than most. What advice do you have for aspiring young entrepreneurs, either here at Notre Dame or elsewhere? If you could offer one piece of advice.
I would say, don't go too quick. Don't feel the need to rush to get to something or to get to some dollar figure you want to achieve in life. And I would encourage people to think about their purpose, what they're passionate about, and understand a roadmap to get there, and think about that continuum of time, and think about that journey. So I think that definitely served me well, and helped shape and form, and I think has allowed me to be successful at what I'm doing now because of taking the time to have the experiences I needed to have to become a better operator, a better leader, a better support provider for the people that I support in the company.
Perfect. Thank you. So now that we're going to turn it to the audience, I think our first question is, what would you say to an undergraduate student who is interested in working overseas? Perhaps Switzerland sounds nice, they say.
We're hiring. Look, I would really encourage people to pursue, especially if they haven't spent a lot of time outside of their home country, wherever that is, to definitely get as much exposure as you can there. And there's so much you can learn about doing business and running companies by understanding diverse cultures and people. When I go to a meeting in Japan versus China versus Germany, the way you even approach the discussion, the people, what you say at the beginning versus what you say at the end, it's all different. And so I think educating yourself on culture and history. I loved history because it just informed me. When I went to Europe and I studied in Italy, and then I traveled through Europe, learning about history and understanding why the Germans and the French have their differences, or the role that Britain played through the development in Western civilization, and understanding how that relates to how these countries interrelate, how people interrelate, and therefore how business gets done. So I would encourage the people that want to go overseas or go to other countries, whatever country you're in, and get exposure. The world is smaller today, absolutely. So it's easier, I think, to interrelate, and we have Zoom and all these things we didn't have in the 90s and even early 2000s. So there's ways we can interrelate and learn now that it's much easier, but there's no substitute, of course, for going, living, and being a part of, being present in other places. And I think, honestly, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur and build any business that's going to be selling a product or a service that's going to have any global potential, then I think understanding these things is fundamental.
Great. Our next question says, thank you for defining the disparities between production and storage costs for renewables versus fossil fuels. Are there similar disparities in distribution costs?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an existing grid network that delivers electricity, but there's a lot of places where the grid doesn't exist. And there's a lot of solutions that are coming to the forefront now, like hydrogen, for example, that because of what's happening on the geopolitical side and what that's created in terms of some of the price volatility and what a lot of countries are suffering through now with the high cost of fuel. This creates, I think, opportunities to solve the current disparity on the distribution side, and looking at alternative fuels that are getting some priority now. So, the other thing that's happening with distribution is, if you look at the sun, the sun alone could power the planet over 10,000 times. I mean, with the energy that it creates. The problem is, the sun's not everywhere, and you have to distribute electricity. And so there's a lot of, there's projects that are going on right now in Australia, in Morocco. Australia, for example, is looking at building this massive solar facility that there's an underwater DC cable. It's a 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatt line, subsea line they're putting to Singapore from Australia. Morocco's looking to do the same thing to the UK to provide 10% of the power. Not the state of Morocco, there's a company that's looking at building some massive things out. So distribution absolutely becomes important and will become more important as we look at alternative fuels. And it's another area that requires some innovation and a lot of interesting things going on there, for sure.
I want to preface this question one more time by saying that Energy Vault had the most successful IPO of 2022 so far. Derek asks, I read in an article that Energy Vault is a, quote, risky investment. What is the reasoning for that, and what is your response?
I wouldn't disagree. This is our first deployment year. We're definitely a new disruptive technology. Absolutely. A few things around that. So why have we performed well? So why are investors sort of betting on us, right? Because the market's the market. It's not right or wrong. It just is. Okay. We're using gravity, which is proven. So there's some companies that went public that have a technology where they won't have anything till 2024, 2025 as an example. So first of all, I'd say not only are we using fundamentally the basis of a proven technology, it's the basis of 90% of all energy storage today. But also we built a commercial scale system and interconnected it to a live national grid, and not a 250 kilowatt, a 5 megawatt system. So I think there's a lot of things that have led companies like Saudi Aramco, the largest energy company in the world, BHP, the largest mining company in the world, Korea Zinc and Sun Metals, which is the largest non-ferrous metals produced in the world. These are people and groups of customers that are the largest in what they do. They're not only customers of ours, but they've also invested in the company. So to do that, you go through a lot of due diligence. These are not unsophisticated players. And when you're fundraising, like I've been doing the last 4 years, you go through diligence with every round, and And then when you talk to customers like the nature of even Enel Green Power, which is an Italian company, but it's the largest independent power producer in the world. They have 50 gigawatts of wind and solar and hydroelectric under their management. They're in 28 countries, and we're doing a first project with them in Texas. So there's a lot of validation, I think, out there by the nature of companies very reputable and the largest in their respective spaces that are investing. So, but I would say that, from a risk perspective, this is our first deployment year. We just broke ground in China, for example. We did a deal that I think is, well, economically, and I think we're going to have a lot of opportunity there. It's real important for the world because China, as I said earlier, is planning to increase its greenhouse gases for the next 9 years. There's no walls around China. All that stuff goes up to the atmosphere, heats it up, and we are creating these unpredictable weather events, like the flooding in Germany, that could happen in Texas, the fires in Australia. You can go on, and these things take lives, tens of hundreds of lives. So we're heating up the atmosphere, and there's these events that are going to come. We can't predict them. I mean, in a sense, we're killing people every day. We just don't know when it's going to happen. So that's a little scary. Again, this gets back to the 8 kids. I want a nice planet for my children, their children, and for the world, really. So this deal in China we did with a Houston-based company that's Neil Bush, the son of George H. and the brother of George W. They have a lot of strong relationships, and even when when the presidents were there, they had good relations with China. So we did a deal to start with storage there and to get that deployed. And so those things, I'd say, with the global diversity of what we're doing is also, I think, something that's interesting. But for sure, to close on the question, these investments aren't without risk, and this is our first deployment year, and investors will have to decide what to do. As a public company CEO, I can't solicit anything or say anything about the future, really, that people would make decisions on, except just to share what we're doing, like I am. So.
Right. Well, we really appreciate you sharing what you're doing. We are just about out of time, but I want to say thank you.
One in the review. You have to take one. Yeah, of course. Yeah, please. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Oh, sure. Just so everybody with the question, I was asked about the angel investing I'm doing and where I'm focusing that, and why not do it locally here. So first of all, that's one of the reasons I'm here, is part of my re-engagement with Notre Dame and prioritizing time to support innovation here, and really the mission and purpose aligned with the university. So absolutely, I'm here for that, and of course the development folks are doing their job, and we're talking about a lot of different investments, and to me that starts with the students here. So we have an event tonight, for example, where we've got a few hours with I think 25 of the students. That's just me and them, and I think we have food being brought in, and so I wanted to prioritize my time here for the students for this reason. And the angel investing is there's mechanisms that I'm talking to the university about, and the best way to do that. But I most of my focus of my angel investing has been in the healthcare area because I have some experience there, and this is part of sort of the quality of life piece. But going forward, almost all of it's about sustainability. I should disclose I do invest in some small things that are some of my passions, like wine. I enjoy wine and food. So I started a wine company in Switzerland. So I have these other interest things. But anyway, so I'm definitely here for that, absolutely, and I look forward to exploring those avenues.
Great, thank you. Please, everyone, give a round of applause for Mr. Robert Piconi. I want to thank you back to Notre Dame.
Yeah, thank you.